Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is a special Jafar talk with a special person with a special background and experience related to Muslims markets and the global brand. I will talk a little bit talking about our guest Shelina Janmohamed. She's Vice President of Islamic Marketing at Ogilvy. Of course, Ogilvy is part of the empire, which is WPP. She's a global expert in understanding and engaging with Muslim consumers. She's worked with some of the world's biggest brands like Unilever, Nestle, and Coca-Cola. She's the author of definitive work in young Muslims audience. We call it Generation M, which is Muslim, a young Muslim changing the world. And she was named by Ad Age as one of the Europe's 20 women to watch. Her CV and her bio is too long. Okay, and it's worth to read it, so I will continue reading about it. The Times newspaper listed her as one of the UK's 100 most influential Muslim women. Her best-selling memoir, Love at the Headscarf, has been published in 12 languages. She writes writing regularly for The Guardian, Telegraph, BBC, and the National UAE, and so on. So for my audience, I will share her bio, of course, in the description and YouTube channel, plus I will share it in my Instagram. So now the topic, it's a little bit new, okay, new in terms for us as an Arab, talking about Muslims market. Even I have a debate with one of doctors from Germany. He said there's no such thing they call Muslims market. I said, why? He said, because we cannot segregate the market based on the religion. I said, no, we can, because at the end of the day is a consumer behavior. So based on the consumer behavior, we can segregate and we can define the market. So I will start with fact and figure, then we fire with questions. Number one, talking about facts and figures first. More than 1.8 billion people are Muslim. Halal market is almost 2.1 trillion a year, $5 trillion US global Islamic economy. By 2060, there will be 3 billion Muslims on earth. In US, what they call it, US Muslim market worth $170 billion US. So for Malaysia is listed as the #1 Islamic economy in the State of the Economy report, then it will followed by UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. This is some facts, which is what they call it. Even if you Google it, untapped market will be the Muslims market. Why? The answers, of course, with our guest. So the first thing, which is talking about the global brands, why? And by the way, I just read a report from you, Shelina, talking about this your statement, which is they are Muslim. They Muslims believe that faith and modern life go hand in hand. They are global connected, tech savvy, and they can be great allies in sharing brands, right? So what do you think, how we can, as Muslims, we can embed it with the global brands? Even the global brands, they have their own values that sometimes not matching with our values. Please, go ahead.
So Assalamu alaikum to all your viewers, and thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you. It's a great question about whether there is such a thing as a Muslim consumer, and whether brands should have relationships with Muslim audiences, and if so, what those relationships should be. And what we've really seen since the turn of the millennium, but particularly thinking about 2005, 2010, is that Muslims are saying that they have certain values, certain aspirations in the products and services that they are purchasing, and they would like brands and products and service providers to think about how to deliver those values, those products, those services in a way that can help them better live their lifestyle. So you're absolutely right to say that we are not marketing a religion, and sometimes people get misled by the title, something like Islamic branding or Islamic marketing, because it can feel like we're trying to sell Islam, which is absolutely not the case here. We're talking very much about human experience and how professing a Muslim identity or adhering to certain Muslim actions, whether explicit or implicit, shapes our consumption behavior. And I've stood in front of CEOs and CMOs around the world to talk about Muslim audiences. And I stand up and I say, well, there are 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, and Muslims buy stuff. And there's always a kind of silence in the room, and then everybody starts laughing, because this is, of course, the truth. And if we want to think about how to create business growth, but also to make sure that consumers have their needs better met, then we need to create some dialogue between these two. So what is it that Muslims would like in their products and services and in the values that brands communicate? And how can brands and businesses better to deliver those? And there isn't a contradiction to them. Some people say, well, you know, Muslims shouldn't be thinking about the stuff, or there should be no expectations from brands to deliver against those Muslim aspirations. But actually, if you are somebody who feels that you want to purchase a halal product, or you would like to go to a spa which is female friendly, or you would like to have cosmetics that are 100% vegan and 0% alcohol, and there's lots of variations on this, then it is absolutely a consumer's right to demand that from brands. And equally, a brand, particularly global brands, if they're saying, well, there's 1.8 billion Muslims and 2/3 of them are under 30, which is very young demographic, there are 80 countries with more than 1 million Muslims in them, then it is absolutely right for brands and businesses to think about the products, services, and communications they use that can be more effective. The important thing here to just emphasize is that brands and businesses are not and should not be in the business of selling Islam. That is not their remit, and they should stay very much out of it. And consumers equally should not be expecting brands to sell them Islam. That is also not the function of the consumption experience. But what the two of them can align on is that Muslims can say that we have these values and aspirations, and every Muslim is different. We're not saying that 1.8 billion Muslims are looking for exactly the same thing in a product. But they can say these are the kinds of things that we would like in the products and services that we're purchasing. And our expectation is that a brand will step up and deliver us the things that we are seeking, because our consumer dollar is worth as much as any other consumer dollar. And what used to happen, and why we've seen this introduction of the Generation M audience, and why Muslims are increasingly vocal, is that there was a time where Muslims would say, well, we'll accept something that's not halal, or we'll accept something that's second-rate quality. But as these generations have grown, they've said, actually, why should we accept something that's not halal? Or why should we accept something that's, kind of wrapped in cling film and has clip art from the 1980s on it? So this is the dialogue that's been happening. And where we are today is that big businesses and brands are starting to realize that it's important to serve their Muslim audiences. But what Muslim consumers have also been doing is saying, well, if big businesses and brands are going to be slow, we will set up our own brands and businesses. And that's over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen that grow and grow. And now some of those businesses are moving from that kind of small pop-up shop on the internet or on social media to places where they're going from the small into the medium size, or actually into almost that global brand status. And I think that is really testament to a grassroots movement that's happened over the last 5 to 10 to 15 years. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that to come still.
Okay, from that point, how you as an expert with a global agency such as Memic Ogilvy, of course, it will be coming back to the basic, which is I cannot do any branding without understanding my consumer. That's a basic. So based on the customer survey, which is consumer behavior and beliefs, I can start doing my brand and marketing. What's especially your role in Memic Ogilvy, just to educate my audience about your role, please?
Okay, so Ogilvy is a global network, and I'm based in the London office, and we obviously have offices around the world, including in the UAE and other countries in the Gulf. And what we do is, as agencies, we serve our local markets, but we also can gather our expertise from different offices and then focus them globally. So we often work with our Dubai office, along with, for example, our Jakarta, Singapore, Malaysia offices, to think about those global brands and how they can create global strategies in order to make it feel like a global brand proposition, because Muslims are all over the world. They're all talking to each other and they expect a certain consistency in the way that brands operate and the values and the communications they use. But what's also important to remember is that while there are 1.8 billion Muslims and they have some consistency in their values and the things they're seeking, there is also variation in Muslims. So, for example, we see consumer aspirations may have some nuances if we're thinking about Southeast Asia, like Malaysia or Indonesia. They may have variations, particularly in the GCC, but they're also different from minority Muslim countries like the UK, where I am, or the USA, or in Europe as well. And so the strategic opportunity is to think about how to create a proposition that works across all of those for Muslim consumer needs, but then can be tweaked to be localized into those different regions. Let me just make a specific comment about the GCC, because sometimes, and this is the sort of the magic of marketing, I guess, is that the GCC is obviously a Muslim majority region, very high percentage of Muslim population. And sometimes we hear brands and marketers say, well, we are Muslims and our audience is Muslim. You know, what can Islamic marketing really teach us about how to go for these consumers? And I think there are kind of two things that we need to think about. The first is that, well, all of us as marketeers and advertisers and people in branding or in business, we're all human beings and we're selling to human beings. But
Right.
that doesn't stop us from trying to understand specific characteristics and insights and behaviors. And I think the same applies here. Just because we might be Muslim doesn't mean we immediately understand what our Muslim audiences are seeking. That's why you need professional, expertise to understand those trends and insights that are happening. But the second, perhaps more important thing is that of the 1.8 billion Muslims, or the 220 million that there might be across the Middle East, North Africa region, not all Muslims are the same. They also have variations and insights and attributes and groups. And really, it's about this rising Muslim identity in the group that I've called Generation M, which thinks about this combination of being faithful and modern, about the external expression of their Muslim identity, and the fact that they are specifically seeking products which are going to help them to uphold their Muslim values. So it's a very specific group, and we've estimated at around 40% of the Muslim population, and even within that there are subgroups. So it's not saying that this is where we're somehow trying to sell Islam or sell being Muslim to all Muslims. We're thinking about a specific group which is actually actively saying we would like businesses to think about our aspirations to live a Muslim lifestyle. And those are the aspirations that we talk to feel expressive, to have this kind of faithful, modern approach to the world, to think about products that meet the technical requirements of being halal or according to Islamic rules, but also feel very contemporary, very cutting edge, very almost futuristic, and which have a certain pride in the fact that they are either reaching out to Muslims, if they're a brand that's not created by Muslims, or if it's created by Muslims, waves very proudly the flag of the fact that it's created by Muslims. And those brands will often talk about two different things. They can say that, or a number of different things. They can say that they are Islamic brands, which I think is quite a big claim, because Islamic means quite a lot of different things to different people. But more often they will typically talk about Muslim inspired or Muslim values, or kind of supporting a Muslim lifestyle. And those things can have a varying appeal directly to Muslims. But if you think about something that might be Muslim inspired, there's a lot more room in a positioning like that to appeal to people who are also not Muslim, just by saying that these are the kind of attributes of the product and the brand, but they are inspired by the people who set that brand up.
Just let me say, I will tell you what Mr. Nouman Khawaja, the founder of Britain's first premium halal conference food brand, what he said, which is very inspired there. He said that Muslims want what non-Muslims have. Okay, Muslims want what non-Muslims have, which is that I think it's like a global language, which is, for example, yes, I want to drink soft drink, I want to ride the cars using a smartphone, which is that common for all people all around the world. So how we can customize, not customize the needs, it's customize the desire, because we're talking about Muslims, which is maybe different values. I think the big challenge, and I want just to, I want your opinion about that. The biggest challenge for global brands, which is they positioning themselves in some certain area, plus they have their own archetype, plus they have on their own positioning, plus they have their own message. How they can customize that when they're talking to Muslims market? Because, for example, Coca-Cola, okay, the Coca-Cola during Ramadan, yeah, maybe it's work, maybe it's not work, I don't know. So how they can doing the balance between their values as a global brand and their values when they're talking to Muslims market?
And you're right to say that the intersection between those two has to feel very authentic. So, you know, a brand can't just rock up and say, hey, Muslims, buy my brand. There has to feel like it's aligned with the brand values, and that actually that brand has something meaningful to offer to its Muslim consumers. So there can, you know, the entire Islamic economy and the Muslim lifestyle market has been very much on a journey. So really the first stage, and sometimes it can be enough for certain products, is just that they are marked halal. They might have a stamp on them. So some products would just inevitably be halal, for example, if they were vegan and didn't contain any alcohol and were processed in a plant that was, you know, completely vegan. And sometimes some Muslims are just looking for the reassurance that it's been certified by a local halal body. That can be enough for some. Some Muslims don't even need that stamp, but that could be one thing. For others, it might be that if there is a product, as you're saying, that, you know, it's just Muslims want a product that everybody else is having. So is there a halal version of that product? And we're talking very much about food here, for example.
Yeah.
So, you know, a kind of halal variant of that. But actually, as we've seen the market, the lifestyle market grow, but also we've seen a wider move from consumer markets generally to think about more ethical products, to think about more animal-friendly products, and to think about customer service and representation and diversity. We've seen brands more broadly move along a trajectory where they can talk more meaningfully to Muslim audiences and say that their products and services suit their needs. So Muslim brands were actually some of the earliest to think about cosmetics that didn't have any animal ingredients in them for Islamic reasons and didn't have any alcohol. But quickly they realized that those brands could be more appealing to a wider audience because there were other consumers who also wanted to seek products that didn't have animal ingredients, didn't have alcohols, didn't have any nasties in them. And so in that way, some of the Muslim brands, driven by the Islamic imperative, the non-negotiable that the products and services that a Muslim consumer uses simply cannot have any of those ingredients, actually was a precursor to wider trends. And I think the opportunity, if we jump a little bit ahead to where the Muslim businesses either started through Muslim inspiration or who happen to come from Muslim majority countries like in the GCC, the opportunity now is to think about what might start as something serving Muslim values can actually have a much bigger audience, because the standards required for a halal or a Muslim-friendly brand and product can actually appeal to a much wider audience. And actually that can give some reassurance to a growing consumer market, which is looking for supply chain transparency, you know, ethics in terms of animal welfare, naturalness in terms of ingredients, you know, online platforms that perhaps have a certain perspective on the world, you know, the kind of influencers that stand for integrity and certain values. So there's a much bigger picture. Yes, there are 1.8 billion Muslims, and yes, they're spending trillions of dollars, and that's a very important market. And even in Muslim majority countries like the GCC and Southeast Asia, where we work with brands, that hasn't quite been nailed as much as it can. But the opportunity is also larger than that, which is to talk to a wider consumer market, which is looking for brands that have ethics, that feel very contemporary, that are inspired by a certain kind of social responsibility and social enterprise, and also think about a new way of branding for a new kind of audience, thinking about kind of representation and climate and ethics and morals. So there's a kind of big opportunity inside an even bigger
Yeah,
opportunity.
yeah. I think Muslims market is not just what they call this in the side of consuming, is more than inspiring even. So yes, we are targeting Muslims market, but from that it get opportunities for other non-Muslims, such as, for example, the modest fashion industry. Even in US and in UK, even for non-Muslims, they are taking care about that. And in my book, I Love My Adult, I'm talking about one of the reports from US. Many Christians, they love to have what they call the Barbie with headscarf, more than Barbie itself. So there is opportunity, which is that we have to tackle it in a smart way. And the challenge, let us challenge ourselves with this question. For example, we have Vimto, of course, Vimto, one of the biggest brand in Ramadan time. It's Vimto equal Ramadan. That's what's in our mind, which is that perception. Okay, so even as it started from UK, and it's a new bear in the report that I just read it before a couple of days. It's in Middle East, in Australia, it's in North Africa, even in UK and US for Muslims market. Of course, there's no China, no Russia for Vimto. I don't know why, but based on that report, Vimto, they can build their own story, even the origin from UK, but they build their own story and their own perception. When we talk about Vimto, we're talking about memories of Ramadan, the holy month, and iftar time. They're doing very, very, very smart. And even in Bahrain, as I know in the report, they already import the Vimto in, I think, one of the family hair traders in Bahrain, then from all the GCC. So there's a history, there's a heritage, between that brand and between we as Muslims in this country. The question is how we can create that binding between the global brand and Muslims, not just to put that label halal and that's it. No, it's more than that. It's more than just a label. It's relationship, it's consumer behavior, it's a customer experience. It's all this together as a package. It's not just within Ramadan or during Hajj or during Eid, and that's it. That's why, for example, Vimto is number one in our mindset. Maybe other brands, I don't know what, but we have to figure out how we can create that link. My question is, how global brands such as Coca-Cola, and they have like a different, what they call it, stories, especially that open happiness, talking about happiness, talking about something which is a universal values for all human beings. How can tie themselves with Muslims market? That means they have their own customized message only for Coca-Cola for Muslims market. If we customize it, that means we one-to-one communication with Muslims only. Whereas, as I said before from Khawaja, what he said, Muslims want what non-Muslims want. So what will be the gray area or the overlap areas between Muslims' need and the other non-Muslims needs? And I think this is the objective of global brand, to unify people together, either Muslims or non-Muslims, with respect of customization and understanding the Muslims' needs. How we can do that, especially our expert in Mimic Ogilvy.
Well, I think there are two interesting things you say there about the very concept about whether a brand should be unifying Muslim needs and non-Muslim needs. And some people would argue, and this might seem controversial to people listening, that it's not the job of a brand or a business to unify the needs of Muslims and non-Muslims. It's the job of a business or a brand to increase its sales and its profits and its turnover and the value for stakeholders. And so other people would argue that actually brands have an increasing corporate social responsibility to bring some good into the world and actually respond to consumer demands, that actually brands play a much stronger role and a much more social role. And we've certainly seen that over the last 5 to 7 years as, things have become much more political. We've seen different leaders, particularly in the Western world, and brands making statements and coming out on various sides of political and social issues. And we've also seen research that looks at younger consumers, millennials and younger, saying that they find brands that have this idea of inclusivity and togetherness at their heart much more appealing. And those are the kinds of brands that they want to both purchase and work for. So there are these two different ideas of what the purpose of a brand is and how it should behave and what its function is in society. But ultimately, I think they lead to the same goal, which is for businesses to think more about how they integrate Muslims, among many other consumer groups, that are not being served at the same standard as other audiences are being served, into their business growth. And part of the challenge there is to think about your different groups in the very early planning stages and make sure that you're thinking about these large consumer groups and how they can be built into the process at the beginning. And that if there are products or propositions, calendars, communications campaigns, that they have been thought of right at the start and that there are KPIs to measure it as you go through. Rather than what businesses often find themselves doing, which is kind of turning up on, 3 months before Ramadan going, oh God, we should do a Ramadan campaign. And then there's kind of a scramble to figure out how to cut through in a very busy time. And Ramadan, just as an aside, if we go on a little tangent, is very interesting because in the Muslim majority world, it's a very busy, very energetic, very noisy time. And actually the challenge there is how do you cut through? Right. Whereas in Muslim minority countries, we have almost the opposite problem, which is there isn't really anything going on. And brands actually need to do more to step up because, for example, we did a study in the UK called the Great British Ramadan, and around 3/4 of UK Muslims said that they wanted brands to do more in Ramadan, and actually 2/3 said they were really disappointed at what brands were, or more to the point, weren't doing in Ramadan. So as an aside, there's a kind of interesting paradox about what happens in Ramadan. But to your point, you can't just show up in Ramadan and then disappear for the other 11 months of the year. Because it's easy to turn up in Ramadan. Everyone's, I'm not sure how to put this delicately, but everyone's busy being very Muslim in Ramadan. So it's quite easy to wave your Ramadan credentials,
your Muslim credentials. And that's it, yes.
Exactly. You put a crescent moon at the beginning and a crescent moon at the end, and you're kind of good to go. So actually, while it's important to show up in Ramadan, it's just as important to keep going after Ramadan and to be there for the rest of the year if you really want to demonstrate your credentials as a brand, that you're there for Muslims all year round and you understand them. But obviously, some of the times of the year will be dialed up and some will be dialed down, but it needs to be quite a consistent conversation.
I'm curious about one question. Of course, I have a couple of questions. We have 20 minutes almost. Number one, is there different needs and desires from Muslims inside Western countries and the same desires and needs for Muslims inside Muslim countries?
So we talked earlier about this bringing together of faith and modern life, the sense of being very contemporary and being very cutting edge. And this is really the definition, the defining characteristics of the Generation M Muslim consumers. So that is pretty consistent globally. But you raise a good question about, how is the variation between minority Muslim countries and majority Muslim countries? And typically, to talk very simplistically, what we can find is that in minority Muslim countries where there's already quite a heightened sense of modernity, actually what Muslims are seeking is to ensure that their faith is very much upweighted in some of those communications. So again, not saying, Muslims, this is for you, but really cueing in an implicit way that this is designed for, serves, suits, and is presented for Muslims. Whereas what we find in Muslim majority countries is that the faith is kind of quite implicit, it's quite endemic in the culture and in the assumptions people make. And so actually it's about ensuring that brands really feel like a contemporary expression, a world-class expression of faith, rather than something that might be kind of made in somebody's back garden.
If you are an investor and I give you $20 million, which market you are targeting? For the minority Muslims in UK or Muslims in GCC?
If you gave me $20 million, I might abscond and go and live on a desert island somewhere. But I think that was probably not what you were expecting me to say. Well, I think the smart thing is to create a global brand, right? Although I'm not sure how far $20 million would take you. if you wanted to create an original product and an original brand. But I think the magic of the Muslim consumer market is that you can create a global brand that could work across both majority and minority Muslim countries. And we have worked with brands where we look at those different regional variations. And that to me is the most exciting part of this market, is that you can create something local and keep it local, but you could create something that is very global and very globally appealing. And as I was saying earlier, appeals to this big Muslim market, but also has the ripple effect into those wider markets. And I think where we are in this journey is that increasingly, certainly for Muslim startups and Muslim inspired brands, they've kind of nailed what the Muslim values part of it is. But now it's about making the leap from a really solid business that has a really great proposition that obviously appeals to Muslim audiences, the jump from that to being a brand of global stature. And this is the challenge that we see with a lot of kind of upcoming Muslim businesses, particularly those that have attracted venture capital, is that it's one thing to build a brand and appeal to your local audience, but it's quite a different thing to be able to compete with the big global brands, because Muslim consumers are still consumers at the end of the day, and having your Muslim heart on your sleeve and having Muslim values expressed and the kind of origin story go a certain way. But at the end of the day, those Muslim brands are still being compared to brands on a global stage. And if those bigger brands are already starting to meet the requirements of the halal, for example, halal certification, or some of the attitudes around, animal ethics and welfare and so on, then Muslim brands really have to step up and start competing on that global stage and making sure that their brands and their category and the way they present themselves within the category it's just not enough anymore to have a halal stamp. You have to have your brand also delivering a world-class experience.
Perfect. So I have just to highlight 3 points. Number one is we have high potential, unfortunately, but with low sustainability in terms of if we want to create our own brands. I will give you 3 examples. Number one, Fulla, the Muslims, what they call it, Barbie. Yeah, they call it Barbie with a scarf, but I'm against that. At least they call it Fulla. That's number one. Where's Fulla now? I don't know. That's number one. Second, we have from Kuwait, the experience from Dr. Naif Mutawwa, the 99 heroes. Okay, where is it in GCC, Middle East? Nobody know, but there are presence in South Asia, such as Malaysia and Indonesia. And there is another experience, which is after the boycott with Coca-Cola, especially I think in first Intifada or second Intifada in Palestine, and we come up with Makkah Cola. If you remember, Makkah Cola. Where's Makkah Cola now? We don't know. All these stories, unfortunately, it vanished, even if there's high potential, but with low sustainability. Where's the issue here? What's the problem? Why? We have high majority, we have high potential in terms of consumers, but unfortunately, we can't continue. Why? What do you think?
So I think my analysis, and you raised 3 really good examples, is that, it certainly applies to Makkah Cola, the other 2 a little bit, but slightly less, is this notion of the copycat brand and originality in the way that a brand is from the ground up. So again, a little bit earlier, I was talking about the journey that Muslim markets and Muslim brands have been on. And actually at the beginning, it was enough just to create a kind of Muslim halalified version of brands that already exist, because there was so little that Muslims were just eager as consumers to purchase anything that would help them in their journey in living their Muslim lifestyle. But actually, when you just copy something without adding any innovation to it, any creativity, really thinking about the broader context of your audience, I think that brand certainly has a limited lifespan, because after a while, it may well be superseded by something else, or the need for it may disappear. And so when we look at, the Fulla doll is kind of quite interesting, because you see that Barbie has gone on a journey too of, trying to present a whole range, a diverse range of dolls. And I think they still have a long way to go, but they've started to think about that. And if you think about the growth of the Muslim toys and games market, you know, there's been an explosion really in all the kind of quality, variety you can get, but also the quality that you can get today that you could not get in the year 2000, for example, is in a whole different paradigm. And so the challenge I always lay to, you know, Muslim entrepreneurs or Muslim startups is to think about what can you do that's original, that doesn't just tick the box of what Muslim audiences need. And there is nothing wrong with just ticking the box of what Muslim audiences need, because if people need a product, they will purchase it.
Right.
But in order to have a sustainable business that can grow, you do need to have something original in your product that goes beyond just the technical needs. And I think, like I was saying about how Muslim businesses that have grown the first step now need to create a global stature brand. It's the same thing about the original idea of what is the business. You know, is it good enough that people want to keep buying it, and it gives them something original that they simply can't get elsewhere? And a really great example of this was probably 9 or 10 years ago, there was talk of setting up a Muslim Facebook in South Asia. I think it was called a Salam book, I think, if I remember right, or something along those lines. But essentially, all it was offering was being a social media platform, but with a filter on it and a Muslim name. It wasn't offering anything original that necessarily would draw people to a better product. And I think that this is really the key. It needs to be a better product, a better proposition, and a better brand if it's going to be something that grows sustainably. And I think just joining the dots very much to, as we think about where we want this conversation to go. Right at the beginning, you talked about how are we going to get Muslim businesses to be in, you know, I'm putting words in your mouth here, the top 50 global brands or the top 100 brands, because they are just really great businesses. And we haven't achieved that yet. We haven't seen that from Muslim entrepreneurs or Muslim businesses. We're starting to see brands that might be able to get there, but that really relies on some original thinking and for that kind of Muslim inspiration about how could a business and a brand be created, inspired by Muslim values, to offer something completely novel that hasn't been presented before, and which takes its Muslim audiences to a whole new kind of level and appeals to a wider audience. And that really is the challenge of the next stage of the Muslim lifestyle market.
Yeah, for example, I'll give you just 2 examples from Nike and Red Bull, how they are very smart to targeting the Muslims market very emotionally and in functional, emotional and functional. For example, Nike, they launched the headscarf for sport after what's happened with, I think she's Egyptian, original Egyptian. She's their sport related to swimming, and there's like something happening against her, and then come up Coca-Cola with the headscarf for Muslim women and even for other sport. So Nike, they labeled themselves in this. Yes, we support, you know, in this case, we support Muslims. So we have that Nike headscarf. Red Bull, they sponsored for, I think she's a Taekwondo black belt Turkey girl. She's #1 in Turkey in Taekwondo. And she's always wearing the uniform of Taekwondo with Red Bull, always. So this Red Bull and this Nike, and there's maybe other brands which is global, they are smart to what they call it, to positioning themselves. We understand you, we understand your culture, we support you, okay? But at the same time, this is the contradiction happening between time, especially for Coca-Cola. I don't know why, because they are very global and they are existing in different countries, and especially in the first and second intifada, there's a huge boycott here happening in Middle East, North Africa against Coca-Cola because what's happened, conflict. And so my question related to global and brand, how we as Muslim, we can understand and we can digest the experience from global brand to create our own brands as Muslims for Muslims. Of course, we have a couple of examples, but unfortunately, as you said, they are step in the market because there's opportunity they think as a traders, not as entrepreneur. there's a gap. I will give you just a real example. What's happened in Saudi Arabia when they banned Barbie for more than 50, 60 years. There's another company, New Boy, with the creator of Fulla. They say, oh, there's a golden opportunity for us. Okay, there's no dolls in Saudi Arabia. We have to step in Saudi Arabia market with Fulla, okay, with headscarf, and sell everything from chewing gum to I don't know, maybe a bed and something bigger. But as you say, there is no sustainability because there's no innovation. They are not working as a brand, they are working as a business. And there's difference between you are think as a brand or think as a business, as traders. So my question is how we can tapping, for example, fashion, halal market, finance for entrepreneurs, for Muslims entrepreneurs to create their own brand to the Muslims market. What they call the tapping: fashion, halal market, and finance. Yeah.
It won't surprise you or anybody listening to this as somebody who works in branding to say you need to get a brand and you need to invest in it. And, you know, it has to be done at a global level. So obviously, you know, when you're a small business, investing in your marketing and your branding can feel like a really big chunk of your investment. But certainly as any business grows, you know, the reason we're talking about Barbie or Coca-Cola is because they spend a lot of money on their brands and they have relationships with their consumers, and there's a promise and a feeling. And you talked about Vimto and the nostalgia that you have of Ramadan with it. That takes investment in the brand, and, you know, really changing as, you know, with your consumers as they grow. And so you know, with a very understanding that I come from a branding background, so, you know, people might say, well, I might well say this, you know, my experience very much is that if we want to have a sustainable business and to build that relationship, which is really at the heart of the consumer experience and then sits in the consumer heart, the investment in the brand is absolutely essential. And I think that is really the next stage of development. As I said, we've already gone through, we're starting to go through the, you know, the halal stamp is there, the thinking about the wider wraparound of the values, starting to think about communications and, you know, that wider calendar. We obviously need to think about the business growth from right at the beginning of every year in the planning. But that final stage is about the brand that captures the imagination of Muslim audiences and reflects back to them who they are as Muslims living in a very contemporary world. And actually, I think that is really for the taking. The challenge for anyone watching this is, can you be the first to create that brand which really captures global Muslim love in a way that feels very fresh, very contemporary, very innovative, but also speaks to the very heart of the aspiration of the Muslim consumer in lesser or greater amounts, to feel like being Muslim is an important part of the global conversation. And this brand has kind of reached through the packaging, through the screen, through the social influencers, through the advertising to say this has been created for you in order to be part of the world we live in and to better live the life that you aspire to.
I think you're remember, Ogilvy, you have like a website or something related to Muslims market and like white papers or something. That's what I know before maybe 10 years. Still there?
So Islamic marketing is part of the overall Ogilvy offering, and for people who want to read, you can read my book Generation M. There are papers available on Muslim leadership, about Ramadan, about Islamic finance, and a number of other topics to better understand what the Muslim consumer experience is and how existing and new Muslim opportunities exist for brands. So yeah, I think the internet is your friend. Otherwise, we can certainly share some links for people.
Yes, it will be from the official website for Ogilvy, right?
Yes, there should be that.
Okay, I have just a last question because we already reached 1 hour. I'm talking about the last question is about the future of what they call it untapping sectors of industry for Muslims, such as gaming, cryptocurrency, and metaverse, or whatever, that something innovation in the future. What do you think, as for a global brand, they can enter in that sectors? That's number one. Number two, what about us as Muslims? Is there like any opportunity, and how we can catch that opportunity for untapped sectors such as gaming and edutainment and cryptocurrency?
So this is really a very personal answer from, reflecting on Muslim journey and Muslim thinking and creativity, is that Muslim history is full of thinkers that explored sci-fi, that thought about space, that thought about virtual worlds and many worlds and how we behave in them and the philosophical questions. So I think actually these are very exciting opportunities for Muslims to think about how to reinvent themselves in new dimensions and in new places. And actually, as it's so early, this might well be the perfect place to think about what that next new global Muslim brand might be.
Yeah, Second Life game, maybe something. Yeah, that's very interesting. And thank you for your time. I know you are a very busy woman. And I will say thank you again. Plus, we have huge opportunity for us as Muslim. It's not just to consuming, is to what they call it prosumer. You become producer and consumer at the same time. And what we have, as you said, is to think about something innovative, something origin. So we can tapping all that opportunity we have as Muslims in terms of quantity, in terms of the power of the money that we have as a Muslims all around the world. And thank you again. And I hope all this information and your experience will be circulating and people will get benefit from that. And I will invite every audience just to go to Mimic Ogilvy or Ogilvy, the official website, to read your paper and to understand more about how global brand A can understand our markets and they can enter with the smart ways and how we can take that one for our advantages, which is win-win situation at the end of the day. They are business owner, they want money from us. Yes, that's go take it. And from the same time, we will take the experience from your side and everybody will be happy at the end of this story. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you and to your listeners.
Last advice, do you have any references you advise the audience to read from, books or websites related to Muslims markets and how we can understand it?
Well, I think I've already plugged my book, Generation M. Have a read of that to understand our Muslim audiences better. But there are, I think if you search for Muslim consumers, you will find some really interesting information. There is a State of the Global Islamic Economy report that's produced annually, which is very interesting. If you want to think about, Islamic finance, you can have a look at our Islamic finance consumer marketing report. And there are also publications about Muslim travelers. I think Crescent Rating, Have Halal Will Travel. Actually, many. So if I've named a report, it's not because I necessarily favor it, it's just at the top of my mind. And if I haven't, there are some really good publications out there.
Your book available in Amazon?
Yes, you can read Generation M to understand Muslim audiences, and if you fancy a little bit of light reading, you can pick up Love in Heaven's Gulf as well.
My pleasure. Thank you again for this opportunity and for your time. And inshallah, we'll see you later on. I know you are very busy woman, but inshallah, it will be next time. It will be more what they call it questions and more exposure about Muslims mindset. Thank you again, and ma'as salam.
Inshallah. Okay, ma'as salam.
Ma'as salam.